terrific move. I think it's a move that might happen on some of the other ball clubs, whether you're a basketball team or a football team or hockey. And if it does happen, it comes from the heart of the organization. And Mark Cuban's a great example of that.
Now, you mentioned a little bit earlier, Chris, about the Lakers and the Clippers game being postponed. Not like they have to go any frequent flyer miles to play the game anyways, because they're only right across, their locker rooms are right across the building, and I've actually been in that arena. So, I commend both organizations for doing it. But, elaborate on what you feel that postponement will do. Do you think that, unites both organizations? And let's not lose sight of the fact that everybody should know that Jerry West not only drafted Kobe Bryant, but he's also a member of the L.A. Clippers as well.
Well, he's one of their super scouts now, everywhere Jerry West has been. It started with Dr. Jerry Buss with the Lakers and then moved on to the Memphis Grizzlies, and he was with the Warriors in Northern California. And the Clippers were just really glad to have Jerry West come on board, and I think it hit Jerry as hard as it hit anybody. There have been a couple of video clips that I've seen of him talking. He actually called Kobe Bryant the Pied Piper of basketball because there were just so many people that followed him. And it didn't matter if you were black, white, brown, no matter what color you are, what race you were, what religion. He covered the bases on attracting people to the NBA, and that's why he got tapped on, I think rightfully so, by Jerry West as the Pied Piper of the NBA. People just loved him.
Now, Chris, I've heard reports, and I've talked about reports, okay, and I use that term loosely because until I can actually get the sources out there, this is the best I've got to work with, that the helicopter was going at around 180 miles per hour. Is that close to from what you've heard as well?
Yeah, from the NTSB, they've, I'm sure they have a lot of other theories, but that was one of the things that they did put right out there. There was a high rate of speed, and they missed clearing a hill by 20 to 30 feet in some pretty dense fog and clouds around the high terrain there in Calabasas. But that's what the NTSB has right now. They're going to have another release of some comments in about a week. They've recovered all the individuals that were on the hill for an overnight period, and that's good news. They're at the corners being identified with fingerprints and DNA. And it's a thing where also they carted all of the wreckage off the hill, and they transported it to a safe place where they'll probably reassemble it as best they can. We think it's in Arizona, and then they'll have a little bit more of an idea of how everything occurred. There was no black box on this Sikorsky helicopter that can actually seat about 13 to 14 people. There were 9 on board this past Sunday. And there also was no warning sign that you're coming close to terrain like many airlines have. And both of those suggestions were made by the NTSB about 10 and 20 years ago, and they've been ignored by the FAA. And when the NTSB, National Transportation Board, announced that the other day, you could kind of tell there was a little animosity that maybe those recommendations should have been followed. I got to believe that they're going to happen in the future.
All right, we got a few more minutes to go, so I want to make sure I get to these points, Chris. Now, was it true that Kobe Bryant was cradling his daughter during the crash? Have you heard anything to that extent?
I have not heard anything about that whatsoever, but geez, and all the pictures that show them, whether they're at a Laker game or one of her youth games, they're very, very close. I wouldn't doubt it, but I cannot speak to that as a factual comment.
No problem. And my final question to you, Chris, as I know, back in December 31st, 1972, the last air crash that I remember that impacted the country like it did was when Roberto Clemente lost his life delivering on a humanitarian mission. Kobe Bryant was so big that do you feel that the Kobe Bryant tragedy rivals that of Roberto Clemente, knowing these guys were superstars that lost their lives way too early?
Hey, listen, I love Roberto Clemente. He just collected his 3,000th hit. He knew he was headed to the Hall of Fame. But it was a different era than Scott. And this era is filled with social media,
right,
awareness, alertness. It's almost like anything that happens, it hits Twitter or Facebook, and all of a sudden it's everybody's got it on their iPhone. So to say that one is bigger than the other, they both were tragic, especially for baseball, losing Clemente, and for the city of Pittsburgh. But right now, I know Southern California is aching, and they're trying to get through this thing the best way they can. But they're both powerful events that you always just shake your head and go, wow, way too young, and we're going to miss these people.
Yeah, one thing that just came to mind, Chris, is I remember the tragedy involving the Marshall football team impacted as well. We won't get into that now, but when I talk about aviation issues, that one stands out in my mind. So I just thought I'd kind of bring that up. But Chris, we can't thank you very much for coming on the program today. I wanted to let everybody know once again that Chris Roberts, is a veteran UCLA broadcaster who actually covered basketball, football, and baseball and did it well, and is currently the member of the Southern California Sports Broadcasters. And once again, it was a pleasure being out there. And Chris, I'm looking forward to having you and some of the other people I got to meet on the program. So Chris, thanks again for your time. And once again, we'll be talking to you really soon. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Scott, my pleasure. You and Candy are more than welcome out West Coast anytime. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you, Chris. Have a good night. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Chris.
Bye-bye.
The same.
All right, Candy, let's talk about the tragedy for a moment. Okay, Kobe Bryant. Would you say that there's too much overload going on? I realize the impact nature for this particular crash, and I had to experience some of this over during Super Bowl week. It's just unfortunate that it almost seems like the Kobe overload is overshadowing a lot of the existing developments of a big sports week otherwise.
I think, and rightfully so, it should. I mean, the Super Bowl goes on every year. A player the magnitude of a Kobe Bryant. First of all, there aren't that many players in history that rival him. And to be taken away from us way too soon, I think it needs to be. I mean, it should overshadow the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl will still go on, and I'm sure there'll be some remembrances on Sunday. Speaking of to that behalf, but I think it should.
Okay.
But that's my personal opinion.
Well, no, and that's okay. And you know what, again, I'm not trying to discount the fact that it is a huge tragedy, because it is. And our other co-host in the studio, Louis Adio Weiss, informed me of text message about Kobe Bryant's passing. And when I began, sometimes you always like to hear events when they're actually brought up initially, and Louis was my first point of contact there. But yeah, it is. There's no doubt. That's why I brought the Roberto Clemente thing and then as the Marshall. But you never like to think that anything up in the air, it can all come to a halt very quickly. And I'm glad that we were able to address it tonight. And I know that throughout the course of the program tonight, there'll be other opinions on the matter as well. So, again, it's been a tough week. John Andretti passing, Kobe Bryant, they say these things happen in twos and threes. Well, it's unfortunate that both of these individuals lost their lives way too early. So
I think it's almost impactful, kind of like the young kids up in Canada where the hockey team that lost their life too.
Good point, Candy. Yeah, that was definitely one that unquestionably
the most recent that I can think of.
Yeah, I know the one you're referring to, Rumboldt or
something like
right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I know the one that you're talking about. Again, young lives lost because of an unfortunate accident. And for that matter, I don't want to get onto this subject, but when you see young lives lost here in the southern Florida area, one that stands out in my mind is the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas here in Parkland, Florida, impacted the community and affected a football coach, Aaron Feist. So, but we don't want to get too far, Kobe Bryant, but I understand when you're dealing with young lives, there's no question in my mind that you hate to go ahead and see them end way before their time is up. And, again, the impact is so tragic that, we're going to hear about it for a while. We know that the NBA is still grasping this particular story, and I know there'll be lots of things. Some guys are changing their numbers, and I know the All-Star game probably figures to have a few wrinkles. That'll be for another day. But there's no question that it's a story I'd rather not talk about. The Super Bowl is something we're going to address. So with that said, Louis Adios, why don't you come on over here and give me your take on the Kobe Bryant thing before we bring on our next guest, okay? Louis, and you heard it, and what were your initial reactions about the tragedy itself?
So, and it's kind of going to be hard for me because growing up, and just want to give a brief background, my mornings as a kid weren't like, most other children. I didn't watch cartoons really growing up. My mornings were spent with SportsCenter, and with that it was, highlights of football, basketball, baseball, and one athlete that I always saw was Kobe Bryant. And
right.
It was every morning, getting ready for school, all the way through high school, just watching SportsCenter, whether it was him winning the MVP or seeing all those championship parades in LA or the famous picture of him sitting in his locker. I'll make a comparison real quick. Kobe Bryant's professionalism and drive, what hurt me, because we just had Derek Jeter inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Kobe Bryant was basketball's version of Derek Jeter. He was a true professional who personified what it means to be a great athlete and what it takes. And honestly, I was on my Instagram and I, going through stories of, friends that I've had for years, and I see just a picture of Kobe Bryant with a rest in peace, abbreviation there, and I'm like, what is this? And the next thing I know, I go on, Google, do a search, and New York Times is saying he's died in a crash. Twitter really hadn't gotten to it yet. But when, it came through, as somebody who's not, admittedly, I'm not the biggest basketball fan, but I have an appreciation for the sport because it has history that, kind of transcends time. I was crushed. And, to learn later that, his daughter Gianna, was tragically taken, as well as that of 7 other people. I think it's something that it's going to stick for a while. And the last point I'll make, really, before we get to our next guest is, when Jose Fernandez died in 2016, that was a tragedy that was felt really in baseball circles, and it hurt, and a lot of teams honored him. But to see Kobe Bryant, an athlete who transcended his respective sport, to see tributes all the way from golf to the NBA, it's sad, but we'll talk more about that later as we go on in our show.
All right, we welcome our next guest of the Sports Exchange, former Los Angeles Rams running back Mel Fard. And Mel, thanks for being on the Sports Exchange. It's a very somber show, but we're going to talk about Super Bowl first. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
Okay, well, first of all, what are your thoughts about the Super Bowl right now? What do you expect come Sunday?
I think it's going to be an exciting game. I think it's going to be what the fans are looking for, a little bit different than last year, where it was a defensive battle. A lot of fans didn't appreciate that. Me, being a football player, I kind of did appreciate that because I thought it was a lot of good football play, a lot of good hard hitting. But I think there's going to be a lot of action in this game here. There's going to be some ebbs and flows, and I think there's going to be a lot of scoring. I think the fans will probably appreciate that.
Now, were you telling me, I want to make sure the listeners understand this, don't underestimate why you don't understand why the Kansas City Chiefs are favored?
Yeah, I think the line just moved up to 2 now. And the reason why I say that is, although I would love to see Andy Reid win one, I'm not sure if defensively they can hold up. You're probably only going to get, they'll probably get, if they're lucky, somewhere at 8 to 10 possessions, if they're lucky. Now, if they're able to get 8 to 10 possessions, they have a really good chance of winning this game. But if San Francisco is able to shorten the game and then play with a lead, I think it'll be very difficult it'll be a lot harder on the Chiefs than it would be if vice versa. Now, the last two